we're running a little bit short of time, but I want to make sure that we can cover a number of questions, not just from myself, but from the audience. This is your opportunity to ask difficult questions, if you like, of the panelists. Before we start, can I get a show of hands? How many of you are vendors? Either cloud service provider or other vendors? Okay, quite a few. How many are from government agencies? A few. Academia? Or just interested parties? Nothing else to do, sorry. I don't mean that. Okay. I think if I may kick off by asking the first question. There is today in US and UK a cloud-first policy, all right, by the government, which means that if government agencies have an application, they have to opt in to use the cloud. And there's only opt-out if you have a valid reason, all right? So I'm going to ask the panelists, I know that today in Asia, there aren't any, as far as I know. I know Australia is going to implement that. So is this a panacea? Is this something that, not realistic? Why hasn't this been achieved or implemented? So maybe I can ask the ladies first. You have the honor. Yuling.
Hello. Okay. I think if you've seen from my presentation, the journey that we started, essentially we had a fairly small panel of providers. So we felt that the cloud-first policy at this point in time is probably something that will limit the choices for the agency, but that's something that we are really going to consider moving forward when the number of service providers actually increase, as well as when we actually launch the cloud store. So that's something in the works that we are looking at. It has its advantages in the sense that it will drive adoption up. But I think some of the lessons learned from the other two governments who have implemented also is that if there are too much choices and this is that policy, sometimes it doesn't really drive the right adoption that we wanted. Now the gentleman.
Yep, Peter.
So I travel around the world, and I'm Australian, so I do spend some time in Australia. And Australia had a cloud-first policy a long time before they had security standards or procurement vehicles in place for cloud. So, I think that's from a cloud service provider's point of view, it's challenging because everyone's told that they must use cloud, but they say, well, we can't because we don't have the right regulatory environment, we don't have the right procurement environment, we don't know how to buy it, we don't have the ability to buy things on demand, etc., etc. So Singapore, I think, has been quite wise in the measured approach that they've taken, and I think that having choice for customers is always important, and having the opportunity for customers to be assured of the security. So MTCS is a new standard, or MTCS is a relatively new standard, and having a number of providers that can be compliant with that standard is also important in order for customers to take a choice and understand the risks associated with that choice. So I think it's important to have everything lined up, not just a policy that says you must do something, otherwise it becomes an empty policy.
For Thailand, as you can see my presentation, and if you go back 2 years ago, okay, the cloud providers in Thailand were not up to standard compared with right now. So the government decided they have to do something. So we use the G-Cloud to stimulate the market in order to make the cloud providers to be more, back 2 years ago, if you want to get a cloud service from a cloud provider in Thailand, probably you wouldn't get like right now. So it's kind of nothing there. So the government decided to be an early adopter. And as I said in my presentation, in terms of choosing cloud, I think it's not a question now. It's just how or when, not why.
Maybe, by the way, if you have any questions at any time, just raise your hand. If not, I will continue to monopolize this. Okay, maybe following on that is, are there any specific issues or challenges, all right, that prevent agencies from going on to the cloud? I know you all have maybe touched on briefly, but perhaps what are one or two, very key issues or challenges? I think Dr. Sak mentioned you give them free and they don't come on. So maybe I can ask Yuling to start off.
Actually, a lot of it is on mindset change, because for cloud, you buy services. You don't own anything. You have, based on the governance requirements that is put in, there will be some kind of control. But again, like I said, I think upfront that it's really a paradigm shift. It will take the agencies time because they need to get into the idea that it can work and it will be able to work effectively. And it is also important to then have good success stories that demonstrate that it works. So I think for Singapore government, their agencies, they do tend to be a little bit more cautious in the front. But once I think they see the benefit and it reaps the benefit, then basically they will be going in more aggressively. That's why our plans in the next few years is really to increase the number of choice in terms of providers, because we see demands for either moving from legacy infrastructure as well as new systems and projects that they would like to do.
So I think there's a lot of fear, uncertainty and doubt regarding the cloud. People don't really understand it. There's a lot of misunderstanding about what cloud actually is. People call a data center that just is in the back of their office a cloud of some sort. So there's a lot of misunderstanding about what cloud means. The second thing is that whether we like it or not, this is a disruptive change, and a lot of IT people have grown up to feel that things are secure if they can see them, and they need to see the flashing lights. And if the flashing lights aren't flashing anymore, then that's how they know the system's not working anymore. So, this cloud is a new paradigm shift, as has been said. And I think it's important that we put a lot of education into our customers so that they actually understand what they're getting. The other thing is there has to be a need. IT is not a means to... It's not the end in itself, it's a means to an end. So unless there's actually a compelling reason for someone to have the need to use cloud, it could be saving money, or it could be more agility, or it could be doing something that they just can't do on their existing infrastructure. Unless that need exists, it's the same with any technology, why would you actually want to use it? So I think the combination of those three.
Okay, I'll give you one example. One of the strategy we use is that for those who are not quite sure to go on the G Cloud, we say to them, why don't you use G Cloud as a backup system? And probably you heard about Thailand protest, and there's one agency, the protester just got in there and they just turned off everything, the light, everything. Unfortunately, their system is on our G Cloud. So we were sort of see if you use G Cloud, you wouldn't have this problem. So for Thailand, I think we have to have a number of strategies to convince them to use on the G Cloud. And but as I said in my presentation, for Thailand, I would divide applications into two types. The first one is the easy one, not too complicated. That one, I think we don't have any problem in convincing them to move their applications on the G Cloud. The other one is the big system, as I said in my presentation. We have to have separate way of doing this. mostly these systems are commercial database like Oracle, SAP, and you need to go and talk to them, separately. And one of the challenges is that they would ask us how can we migrate our legacy system to the G Cloud smoothly. And I think one of the agency we've been talking to them, it took us 6 months to get the requirement.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not easy, to change their mindset to go on the cloud. So still a long way to go, at least for Thailand.
Yeah, it is a journey. We all know that. Okay. See, yes, there's a question, a hand. Show a hand. Good for you. Can we get a mic? Perry, yeah. Perry, yeah.
Hello. Hi, Ms. Ma. This question will be directed to you. My question is, what are the views of Singapore government and IDA, say, on the new MTCS standards in comparison to the existing security standards?
The MTCS is an initiative, essentially, I think, on the NCCO office to really standardize in terms of the deliverables as well as the way in which all the cloud service providers are operating, so that it gives assurance in terms of when they are hosting with the cloud service providers itself, that they would be minimally assured that there are certain things in terms of the operating parameters that they will be doing. I think when it comes to G-Cloud, if you looked at the dates itself, G-Cloud actually started even before MTCS actually was actually born, I would say, in terms of Hing Yan's baby, right? So I think as we moved on, I think obviously there are differences, and I think that it is important for the government because for us, we need to ensure that our security compliances are necessary to meet the purposes of what our needs are, because it is the business logic and the data that belong to very important people, our citizens itself. So there will be reviews as to how it's going to be happening in terms of when the new tender is called or the new services that we're asking for. We will then communicate how that will be addressed.
Well, as a observer, I think it will become a mandatory requirement for procurement, right?
Currently, for all public cloud, I think you probably also are aware that is mandatory. I think it's been highlighted already. But the fact that as a private cloud, in fact, we actually ask for slightly more. So the question will be then, how will the gaps be addressed? So definitely, I think when it comes to government agencies hosting on the public cloud, that definitely gives them assurances that information hosted on the public cloud for that nature, it actually can be met.
Peter, do you want to comment on this?
Well, I think a couple of things. One is, as Ma Yuling says, it is a new standard, and some infrastructure is already there, and others will get there eventually. I think that it's just a matter of time. I think that it's also quite unique, actually, in that it offers multiple tiers. So for some cloud service providers, they may only be able to achieve the entry level, level 1, because just the way they do things, and that's going to be perfectly okay for public data, less confidential information, and then it goes up to level 2 and level 3 and gives people the assurance that if they do have highly confidential data and that someone is assessed as being tier 3 certified, then that gives them that added level of confidence, particularly when it comes to the location of data, for example. Being assured that the data actually stays in Singapore is a very important thing. If you're starting to deal with the privacy-related data, then the Privacy Act in Singapore, etc. It's very important that these standards protect the customer's data. As I said, the government really cares about their constituents and their data, and they have an obligation to assure their citizens that they're taking care of the information they have on them, because it can be very easily misused.
Yeah. I think the other aspect is that IDEA also said that there's a provision for cross-certification, right, with international standards. So nothing is
I can talk on that just briefly. There's actually ISO 27001, which is the baseline, and then there is a cross-certification path. So it's well documented, actually, that how you go from ISO 27001 to MTCS and the various levels, and you actually go through an audit process where you look at every one of your controls and how they measure up and what you have to do to actually achieve the outcome. So it's actually very well documented.
Okay. Well, related to the procurement issue, maybe I can ask the two government agencies to comment on what are some of the rules and policies relating to procurement for cloud services. This is for the benefit of vendors out there, okay?
I think the vendors out there are quite familiar that the Singapore government occasionally we call about tenders. Essentially, cloud services are also called through those procurement mechanism itself, both for the public cloud as well as all our implementations future in terms of private cloud itself. So with these procurement bulk tenders in place, the government agencies could very easily go buy from these, and it will kind of quicken the time for them to adopt itself. So the industry welcome your responses to all the tenders that we're calling itself, so that we can actually increase the number of panels of service providers that we have for our agencies when it comes to cloud services.
For Thailand, it's free of charge.
Free of charge.
But for EGA, we have to do our procurement. Okay, basically we just have some sort of specification for cloud provider in Thailand, and each year the specification gets tougher and tougher. Of course, we have to learn with the providers too, because unlike Singapore, then you have world-class cloud providers already there. But in Thailand, the government said that you cannot put your data out of country, so it must be in Thailand, must be in the country. So our job is to make sure that our cloud providers can do the job properly.
You got me worried for a moment that the free of charge is passed to the vendors. Okay, we have about 5 minutes. Yes, yeah. A question? Yeah.
Yeah, we are talking about G-Cloud today, and one of the key components for cloud computing is cross-border data flow. So I want to see, what the government view on cross-border data flow, whether foreign supplier, foreign companies is able to provide, services to the government, or do they need to, because some of the data need to be resided in Singapore or in Thailand, do they need to kind of like set up their server location here, or, want to see what's the view of the government?
Not just server, but maybe data storage as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
Data storage, server and data.
Basically, what's the government view on cross-border data flow, on G-Cloud?
Okay, our government agencies have varying needs. Some of their requirements require that the data and the processing have to be data sovereign within the country itself. But again, there are also different cloud services, which could be a tool provisioning that doesn't have any data structures, etc., that is flowing outside, but the service could actually be outside of the country. So that is the current view that we are taking. Of course, I think we also would need to be concerned about in the country that you're in, then, what are some of the control measures which are in place. And also, as a service provider, there are many of the standards and policies, I think, that Peter has shared as to how much of it that actually you are also kind of complying and demonstrating. So these are all important considerations for us in terms of making decisions.
For Thailand, as I said, that you can't, if you are a government agency, your data must be in the country. That's period.
So I'm not from the government, I'm from Amazon Web Services, but I think it's important, as Mei Ling says, that you actually look at what the data is that you're talking about. It wouldn't make any sense for a tourism board, for example, to say all of our data has to stay in the country, because the tourists don't come from within the country, they come from other places. So you want to store the content for your website close to your customers. So you're going to store, if you're going to attract people from the US to Singapore to go on a holiday, then you want to use the data center in the US to put the information about why Singapore is such a wonderful place to come and visit. But the data is public data. It doesn't matter. And so it's really important to segregate your data. The whole opinion that, governments cannot put data or compute outside of their country is a very general statement that simply doesn't help when it comes to the practical realities of the different types of workloads that you're doing. You may, for example, as a government, have some overseas development happening, for example, in another country. That's not going to go into production, it's just test and development. There's no reason why you can't use cloud to do that test and development in a different country and then bring that back to your country to do the production. So the classification of data and what you're actually using the computing power for is a very important component.
Okay, maybe I can ask the last question. This morning, Teresa Carlson from AWS mentioned that in government cloud computing, there is this benefit of so-called disruptive innovation. All right, so through the cloud, you can engender more of such benefits. So what I'd like to ask is that, does Singapore and Thailand view this as something, as part of, the objective of doing cloud computing? Yeah.
I think in last few days, I think yesterday, today, and probably later on, in terms of some of the discussions about data management, I think there are users of disruptive technologies in Singapore already. I think the encouragement of the agencies to try on them. So we definitely are moving towards in that front. And the agencies are encouraged, and there are enablers to kind of, in terms of programs in place to help the agencies kind of get on board as quickly as possible. So definitely we do agree that, what Teresa said actually has some benefits itself.
Dr. Sir?
Okay, probably you remember my presentation, the slide or the platform as a service.
Mm-hmm.
We encourage agency to put their API on the cloud. And, if you have a API available, someone might get an idea to, mix and match that. That's, I think, encourage them to do things differently. Yeah. I think the cloud is the platform for do something creative, innovative, I think.
Okay, thank you. The time says I have 20 minutes left, but I think this is for the next speaker. So I think it's now time to draw this to a close. Let's thank the panel members this afternoon. Yeah, thank you.